Welcome, everybody. Captain Ron here with First Officer Dieter and our Chief Technical Officer, and then our other captain, our responsible captain, Eric. Hey, how are you guys doing tonight?
Guys,
We,
our flight attendant tonight is otherwise occupied. It's the holidays, and so there's a lot of stress and a lot of obligations, and she can't be here tonight. But she
so
said
And who would have
Happy New Year to all of
thought
you.
that closing out 2024, we have a few aviation news related items to discuss today. So
Please
oh,
raise your hands, you guys, if you haven't been watching any news, and we won't even start with it.
yeah, and put your name in the hat there if you're interested in what's going
You don't know
on
anything.
in the airline aviation world this week. And I want to say thank you to Susan Michelaccio for the gifts.
yes,
I forgot to ask Eric and Dieter. I tried to email them the codes. Susan does this every year. And I don't know if I mentioned, I talked about it before the show last week, but it was funny because they went to another Ron Nielsen. Well, I actually went to this other Ron Nielsen is deceased, but he was a good friend of this lady in town whom I've never met. And so she called me up out of the blue, said, "Hey, I've got a card that's sent to you." And she actually had a conversation, I guess, with Susan. But anyway, they end up getting there, and the irony is this is a longtime friend of hers named Ron Nielsen. He had since died. Somehow they went there, and then she has a son who's been working at Southwest for the last year. He's been in the airline industry for a while, but anyway, so a little bit. I'll try to get her on the show maybe
so
sometime.
yes, I did get the email, and thank you, Susan, for thinking of us and for
Yeah.
supporting us in every way. And that Starbucks certainly helps at 3:30 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah.
or the idea of Starbucks.
The concept. Yes, thank you, Susan, very much.
Okay, so here we are. Let me crank up the. I almost said something else that I'm glad I didn't say. We're gonna crank up the. Hopefully, you can see that we're sharing the right screen.
Yeah, it was the home slide.
Perfect. So here we are, Fearless Flight weekly live show. You know the drill. Every week we come here to support anybody who's afraid to fly, people who know somebody's afraid to fly, or if you're just fascinated with airplanes. And we have this awesome group of people. It's our Fearless Flight Birds of a Feather private Facebook group. If you haven't joined, please do. If you haven't been on in a while, go over and check it out. See who's there. We get a lot of input during this time of the year. People flying all over. I can't believe I just forgot her name. She went to England, and we got some other people. Lots of people going to Hawaii, and so it's a great place to get support there. Tonight we're gonna run through. I had this on my agenda to talk about the 10 biggest advances in the history of commercial aviation. I thought that'd be a great way to close the year, this being our last time together before 2025. And then life happened. And so the other one, we're going to talk about this week in aviation, some of the things that happened out there that you might feel tempted to get triggered by. We're going to try to put some sanity into it where it's appropriate and help you get over that if you're bothered by that. And of course, any and all questions that you might have, we welcome. So there were 4 incidents we had, and Eric found another one just before we came on, and it's been one of those weeks in there. We'll go through them here in order. Eric's got a few words to talk about. This was a de Havilland 8-400, an advanced, just kind of a stretch version of the Dash 8, and they had some problems there. If you want to talk about that, Eric.
So these guys had this is some of the happy news. That's as it says 8400 or the Q400 as the Dash guys call it. It's extremely capable, high-powered turboprop. And when they landed in Halifax, they were under the impression that everything was fine, and it was until the left landing gear collapsed, and the left wing contacted the runway. There were some flames coming out from behind the wing from the contact on the runway. but the pilots did a really good job of keeping the airplane on the runway, sliding it straight down the runway to a stop, and it either stopped on the runway or only slightly off the side. All the passengers got off with no injuries and no fatalities. And the last line there on the slide was kind of a joke by me. The only bad news was there was a delay in recovering checked luggage because the airplane was trashed out on the middle of the runway. But nobody was hurt, and the pilots did a great job controlling it. So yeah, that's real bad luck and very strange. And certainly there'll be a reason forthcoming after investigation as to why that happened. But the crew, the flight attendant crew and the pilots handled it fine, and nobody was injured.
Crew training and performance.
So here's some more crew training and performance. I forget. They were going. KLM was going to Amsterdam. I can't remember where they left from, but they did have a hydraulic failure of an unknown nature in the 7-3, and they decided to divert to Oslo, or an airport about 60 miles south of Oslo, and they landed, and possibly because of the nature of the hydraulic failure or whatever, they had steering difficulties or rudder input difficulties, and at a very low speed, the airplane slid off the runway into a snow-covered grassy area. And once again, the flight attendants, the cabin crew, and everybody evacuated everybody, and there were no injuries, and there were no fatalities, and there was still a delay recovering checked baggage because the airplane's out in the middle of the grass. As Ron likes to say, you guys like to come all the way into the gate every time. If they just get you to the airport, you're unhappy. Well, it was parked out in the middle of the grass with the baggage on it, and once again, no injuries, no fatalities. So well handled by the flight attendant crew and the pilots.
Yeah, and when it says low speed during landing, if you have hydraulic problems, sometimes that may affect the brakes, and it certainly affects the rudder control as you get slower speeds, and so that's why sometimes they'll lose a little bit of directional control. But when you get down that lowest speed, leaving the runway isn't as big a deal as it is if it were much higher speed there. So. And then, of course, this was in the news, this believed missile strike. I saw, I don't know, you guys probably did too, saw all the shrapnel damage on the vertical stabilizer that they found there. So,
and Ron, look this up and pronounce it for me 3 times, and now I forget how to do it. But
Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan, you know, as I was making reference to earlier when we were talking about missiles in the operational theater of the Middle East, sometimes you just have to be careful where you're vacationing. And if your airplane gets hit by a missile strike, there's not a lot the flight crew can do about it. And there was some cell phone video of this thing descending and hitting the ground, and it is beyond a miracle that anybody survived, and apparently a large number of people did survive. Which is just freakish. So that was our statistical outlier. We really can't talk you into relaxing over not being shot by a missile. And if you're going to see Toto and Dorothy in Kansas, it's less likely that you'll be shot at. I really have nothing else to say on that.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs. It's always sad when we have a loss of life or injury in airplane, but for such a silly reason as this, it's terrible. It's the second time that either the Russians or somebody using Russian equipment has allegedly.
And the only thing I'll add to here from, maybe even a more European perspective is that really no Western airline is using Russian or Ukrainian airspace to begin with, and Azerbaijani Air, I guess they had routes in and out of Russia operating. So again, like Eric said,
they were part of the former Soviet Union, I believe, weren't they? And so they're affiliated with them, and that's why it's interesting to see that the president of Azerbaijan was not happy with Putin's apology and not accepting responsibility. So I don't know, maybe he's doing something behind, little vodka behind the scenes or something. I don't know. So, and then of course this is the big one that that happened. And again, we're going to look at this one a little bit more detail. Got some things coming up here that Eric's going to go into more detail. But the thing that of course brought this into the news: number one, the fatalities; number two, the media, the fact that we can see that; and number three, the pictures, the actual destruction of the airplane at the end. It reminds me of the ATR down in Brazil that crashed, where somebody had it on their cell phone. So you know, you can guarantee this will be replayed millions of times. And I had a couple of people write me how distressing this was for them to look at it. And I told them the same thing that I remember the networks finally resorting to during 9/11. They finally quit showing that. And so my advice to any of you out there that run across this, if you can, just don't look at it. It's going to do you no good. It's a tragedy, and we'll talk about it here in just a little bit with Eric. So these are the so far what we know, and we don't know much. And Eric and I will try as much as we can to stay away from speculation. But hey, we're pilots and human, and so we'll probably touch on some possibilities at least. So you want to go ahead, Eric?
Okay, so you guys have probably seen film of this over and over and over and over, because the network is showing it over and over and over. And the airplane departed, and then it flew to this Muan International Airport. And they reported to the tower, right, that they had struck
Well,
birds.
didn't the tower warn them of birds in the area?
Yes, there was a warning issued of birds in the area.
And somebody had maybe hit one earlier. So a Mayday crew, they issued a Mayday, and they started a landing approach. They started an approach to landing, and then aborted that landing, what we call a go around or misapproach. And they returned, my understanding is, to the opposite end of the same runway, right, Ron? So
I saw a little schematic of it, and they turned around, were landing the other way.
May have been a little bit downwind. So, well, like Ron says, we'll keep the speculation to a minimum, but they did not have the landing gear extended. And I can unequivocally say there's no emergency or abnormal procedure in the 737 emergency checklist that would direct you to land with the landing gear up. The other thing is the flaps were, I believe, if not fully retracted, most of the way retracted, hence the very high rate of speed, because they were flying without the flaps extended, and also probably a little bit higher ground speed because they may have had a slight tailwind component. So all those things were a real tough situation. And if you don't have wheels down on the runway, you don't have ground spoilers extend, and you have nothing to brake with. And
other than friction,
other than friction, and the airplane's sitting literally on top of the thrust reversers, so you can't deploy those either. So the airplane was going very fast, slid very fast, and then ultimately at the far end, where we have our normal antenna array to broadcast a localizer and ILS signals, which we use for instrument landings. In the United States, those are not built up. They're all frangible aluminum, and when airplanes...
Just to clarify, Eric's talking about ground equipment installed on the runway or at the end of the runway to facilitate instrument landings. Go ahead.
Which have to be lined up on the center line of the runway to function as they do. But at any rate, those are in the overrun, past the overrun of the runway, and airplanes in the U.S. have gone off the runway, hit those things before, and they break away. But these things were on a earthen deal with a reinforced concrete barrier where the antennas were. So when the airplane hit that, it was an extremely violent end result and stop, which is what the video shows.
It was the equivalent of running it at 100 knots or 100 miles an hour into a brick wall, basically. The outcome, of course, they had 181 people on board, and two flight attendants were the only ones that lived. They were in the tail, and they were, I think, pretty severely injured. I read. So that's what we know. They did recover the black boxes, and so here's some potential causes. That may be related to bird strike, maybe related to engine failure, maybe mechanical failure, and the fact that they hit that barrier on the runway there was a big thing. And you want to comment any more, Eric, just about the things that we were talking about, the relatively short duration of the flight and running checklist?
Yeah, so Ron and I were talking about it as many times as he and I flew in the 737, not together, but check rides in it. And from their first missed approach to the time they returned and landed was 5 minutes. And I said, geez, Ron, if you were flying and I was helping you with absolutely nothing, you were flying, and I was just working the emergency checklist as fast as I could go to extend the gears and then use the alternate methods to extend the leading edge devices, slats and flaps, and then the trailing edge flaps via alternate electronic and hydraulic means. I don't know if I could do it in 5 minutes without you bothering me if you were doing absolutely everything else. That was an extreme short period of time to return to the runway. And this is one of the ones where we're just gonna have to wait out the investigation. And fortunately, with our good relationship with South Korea, and it being a Boeing aircraft, which has nothing to do with the MAX stuff, the U.S. NTSB will assist with the investigation, and there will be a good and thorough report from those guys, and we'll know everything, but not as fast as you guys want to know it.
Yeah.
So I got two questions
Okay.
here. The first one is related to the Canadian incident. And so what's the difference between the two? How come the one is coming in so slow and the other one so fast? Maybe let's go with that one first.
Are we talking about the Dash versus the 737?
Yeah.
So the Dash, until they got to the runway, do you want to talk, Ron, or should I take that?
I was just going to say, the size of the airplane and the landing speeds are a big difference.
Yeah, that's one big part of it. The Dash is a turboprop with a much higher, what we call aspect ratio, and has normal approach speeds far less than the 737. Number one, and number two, everything was working until they got on the runway. They had no abnormalities at all, so they were executing a completely normal landing until the gear collapsed. So that was a totally different scenario.
And they had some controllability, and they had the ability to stop the airplane a little bit. The main gear that stayed fixed, they still had braking on that, and then the wing dragging, of course, was slowing the airplane down on the other side, and they could steer it directionally up until they got right to the end of that. So yeah, so different apples and oranges in terms of the problems that were there. Go ahead.
Maybe you finish that up and we'll address the second question, because that may have even more relevance in some ways.
That's about all I had.
Yeah, no, go ahead. We'll talk about the Korean thing a little. We'll close that up in a minute. Go ahead, Dieter, with the other question.
So Stacy said, one of the first things that happened for her was her fear of flying with low-cost budget airlines, because their crew is not as well trained or experienced as bigger airlines. And so that was the question: to what extent has training or experience in your view any?
Yeah, I mean, it could be a factor. The thing is, like as Eric was saying before, we don't know anything about the crew or anything yet. We don't know what the nature of the problems leading up to their decisions were. So, even if it was no fault of the crew for what happened, it can still be human error because they simply couldn't cope with all the things the way they developed in the timeline over which they developed. So too much, too fast, or a combination, or it might have been because they added to some of the problems that they had. But again, that's the thing that Eric said. We're going to have to be patient and wait for that because we just don't know. But the things that stand out are the fact that the airplane landed without the landing gear. As Eric said, we don't know of any procedure anywhere that would call for them to leave the gear up. There's just no reason to do that. And then the short duration they had, to complete the pattern, 5 minutes barely would have allowed much time at all to accomplish what we would know would have been the emergency checklist if they had lost an engine. So we'll just have to wait and see on that what the reason is. But again, the key things to remember here is a tragic loss of life. We that's always really crushing when that happens, and it raised the importance of addressing mechanical and operational safety issues. And we'll see. I'm glad that the NTSB will be involved. You got some of the greatest expertise in the world. They're helping in the investigation, and we will find, you may remember when I talked about Sully and the Miracle on the Hudson, there were 35 separate findings as a result of that investigation. Only 5 of which were directly related to being factors with Sully's airplane. The other 30 were collateral things that they learned, and they could spread around the industry to help prevent other accidents. So from this, at the very least, we'll learn something about crew coordination probably. So we'll just have to.
And the NTSB will, as part of their investigation, state what the exact training and experience level was of both the captain and the first officer at the time. That'll be part of the report. And
they do have the 2 black boxes. One is the flight data recorder, which talks, over 150 bits of information about what the airplane was doing, pitch, speed, bank, acceleration, deceleration, all these factors will come out in there, and they can literally use a computer model to recreate everything that airplane went through. And the other black box is the cockpit voice recorder. And because it was within 30 minutes of the end of the flight, the resulting crash, we will have all hopefully we'll have all of the audio they'll be able to listen to the crew conversation, which often can tell a lot, give you a lot of information about what was going on. If not literally what they were doing, you can hear the level of not confrontation, but consternation or chaos up there. So anyway, okay. So the thing I like to leave you with is, if you need something to further nurture your fear, you got them. This week we got 4 of them up there. So take your pick. But we certainly encourage you. That's why we're here, is to tell you that you don't want to waste any of your life worrying about things like this happening. Even though they'll inevitably will have failures into the distant future, but you're not going to be on one of them. So I had, before the incidents this week, I just thought it'd be kind of cool to just look at 10 of the biggest advances in commercial aviation and see how things have changed there. Certainly in my career, and since it's my story, I get to put some of my history in there. That little bitty airplane up there on the left, that is the same type airplane that I got my first ever ride in an airplane. What a day. Came home from church. My folks were talking to one of the fellows in the congregation, and he had been a World War II F-4 Corsair pilot off an carrier in the Pacific War. And he had this little air coupe, which is a cute little airplane. I knew nothing about this day. I was in the 5th grade. This was 1957. And we went out and we flew around for, I don't even know how long. I was just, and it was me and a cousin. He strapped both of us in the right seat, which was legal. and we took off. And I remember all of the things that some of you have shared with me, what it's like when you fly an airplane, not the least of which was when he took off and he made the first turn to the right. He didn't dip the wing more than about 15, 20 degrees. And I was convinced that I was going to fall out of the airplane. That was my first sensation that we're going to do that. But all in all, I kind of got into that. And then we just flew around a little bit, did a little bit of sightseeing and stuff. And then when we came back to land, I'll never forget, we came into the pattern. And as we started to glide around downwind, turn to base, and then turn to final approach, he pulled the engine to idle, and I thought the engine quit because the noise in there from even that little engine made a loud noise. And when he pulled it to idle, it sounded like it quit. So my heart went up in my throat, and then we landed and whatnot. It was a memorable for me. So I was building model airplanes like they were going out of style in those days. And then 1965, my first airline flight. This was a charter air carrier called Saturn Airways. It was not this airplane, but it was one like this, a DC-6, 4 reciprocating engines. And I remember going in there, it was like your aunt's living room, all these velvety type covers on the seats and curtains on the windows. And it was quite the show there. And we flew from, I believe it was Indianapolis to Washington, D.C. And I don't remember, that would have been probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe, or something. Yeah. So anyway, a little bit of my own history there. And so you're talking 1957, 1965, and then, oh my gosh, then we started to get into the modern era. When I left home to go to the Air Force Academy, I rode on a Boeing 720, which had 4 big old jet engines on it, and that is what that was one of the biggest changes in the industry, and certainly continues to be one of that. I don't know if you have any numbers, Eric, but one that I kind of made up probably, but I can remember jet engines, for example, like used to weigh 10,000 pounds and let's just say had 10,000 pounds of thrust. And now they're half as heavy and they make twice as much thrust. Something like that.
I'm sure that's at least that amount.
Yeah. And more thrust probably. And they talk about something called the de Havilland Comet to the Boeing 707. These are the first jet engines. And when you look back in history, there were problems with them and there were some fatal accidents along the way. And we stand on the shoulders of those people who solved those problems and who gave their lives unwittingly to get us to a better place than that. The next thing came along is pressurized cabins. Some of you complain about your ears popping and plugging and not being able to get them to function as well. But believe me, it's way better with a pressurized cabin than it ever was before, because it limited. Did you ever fly in an unpressurized airplane, Eric? Like
aviation all the time, but not an unpressurized airliner.
No, yeah, I was just wondering.
Sure, all the time.
Yeah. And so, you of course you were limited. You couldn't get above 10,500 feet for very long because of the FAA regulations, because if you go above 10, you had to have supplemental oxygen. And so that would have that kept everybody down there. You would have encountered a lot more rain, weather, and all kinds of stuff going on there. Not to mention the winds would affect you a lot more. And so when we got pressurized cabins and jet engines, we could get above a lot of that stuff. And even though we have turbulence up there associated with high altitude and thunderstorms, things like that, it's way better with the advent of jet engines and pressurized cabins. And this wasn't the advent of autopilots. The autopilots go all the way back to 1934, I believe, was the first autopilot. But this is where they started to become way bigger and way better. And with that came some human factors challenges. So in the early days of Orville and Wilbur, it was manual input, and it yielded a manual response to the airplane. Then when we came up with autopilots, now it was you putting an input into the autopilot and the autopilot putting an input into the flight controls. So we became detached just a little bit. And then now with all the other automation, we're more of a systems manager in many parts parts of the flight there. And they reduce workload, but even that's a learning curve. So when you put a new piece of automated equipment in there, the first thing that happens is your workload goes up because you got to figure out how to use it, how it fits in, and the sequence to operate it and all that. And then you start to enjoy the benefits of an easier workload. I flew in the Air Force. The trainer I flew in the Air Force did not have an autopilot. When did you first fly an airplane with an autopilot on it, Eric?
Well, probably in early mid 80s when I got into my first jet planes. Most of the piston ones didn't have it on there, both for cost and weight, because it was so important not to have the weight on the airplane that they didn't have it installed.
Yeah, yeah. And then moving on, of course, air traffic control, dramatically different than what it was when I started my career in aviation in the late 60s, and certainly even into the 1978 when I got my first airline job. Air traffic control has dramatically changed to the use of GPS, radar, satellites, and real-time data, and integrated with modern jetliners to make it the safe system that it is. And despite the workload sometimes and the shortage of controllers, if they're short on controllers, it degrades. It doesn't degrade the quality of the airspace. It degrades the ability to handle as many airplanes. And so that's why when the computers go down and they can't handle as many flight plans and data transmissions, that's why sometimes you end up sitting at the gate for a little bit longer. It's just, what can I say? It's just another thing there. 747. Have both of you guys been on a 747?
I have very few times. And
I remember that. I remember my first ride. I got in there and I thought it was like being inside of a house. I couldn't believe there was something so big and it would get off the ground like that. The 747 changed the aviation in a big way, and we could haul more bodies and improved amenities. Pan Am used to have a club up here on the upper level. If you paid enough money to get up there, they had a spiral staircase. And that's a lot of aviation. It was trying to convince you that it was just like being at home or in some elegant surroundings there. But the 747 launched a whole new era of aviation. And then we've gone back and forth between a lot of lift capacity per airplane to smaller airplanes. And if you've been around as long as Eric and I have, you've watched the thing go up and down in terms of whether we wanted a big capacity or a small capacity. And then came the advent of low-cost airlines. This changed the game forever. This resulted in now, I think, twice as much air traffic as before deregulation. In 1978, and if you've been watching the passing of Jimmy Carter, it was his administration, and in fact, 1978 when they deregulated the airlines. I started my airline career in January of 1978, and in September of that year, they signed the deregulation bill, and that started 30 years of tumult in cost, pricing, and failures. God, you remember, Eric, how many airlines? There were like 300 and some airlines that started over deregulation. By the time we got at America West, we got to 1983 or something like that. It failed. We were one of the only two airlines, or the only airline that started up in that modern era that survived.
Right, yeah. And I remember one of the trivia guys with the U.S. Air, not to pick on U.S. Air, but it was like, if you could name every airline that U.S. Air had been or been merged into it, you were on your game, and there's a lot of them. And I could get about half, and that was going on rampantly all across the country. And
I went to work for America West in 1986. I became involved in the hiring, and I remember interviewing pilots that had been through 3, 4, 5 airlines in their short careers. We're talking like 5 years or something like that. And
that wouldn't be, if somebody said that wouldn't be surprising. You just go, oh,
Yeah, exactly. It was more routine, more the rule than the exception. So, and it what it did is it afforded travel affordable travel options, and dollar for dollar when you compare today to prices and inflation, it is still a bargain to get an airline seat, especially if you're buying something for $79 or something like that. That would have been the equivalent of like a $5 flight way back when. So, Southwest was one of the pioneers in this to efficient. When they first started, they had 3 airliners and they had a 10-minute turn. That meant from the time they pulled into the gate, they would turn, fueled, new passengers, and push back from the gate within 10 minutes. And they were the super efficient model for that. So, and overall, it opened the airlines up for millions and millions of passengers there. And now we're in this in the real modern era here, where we got all this digital avionics, and we call them glass cockpits because now they're all TV screens with LED displays underneath. And this has all gone in to help us with, as it says on the slide, situational awareness and being more precise. Because in large part because of the advent of this digital era that we're in now, you can land an airplane when you wouldn't drive across the parking lot. And when you do that, you give complete faith to the autopilot and the flight management computer, because you're not allowed to fly. In the lowest visibilities, you must let the autopilot do it. And we turn into very, very diligent and hypervigilant managers, as you can imagine. But George literally lands the airplane. So it's quite a thing.
And Ron mentioned you can land the plane when you wouldn't drive across the parking lot. I know I did that twice, or maybe it was 3, but I can remember the 2 clearly. The truly terrifying thing is once you get the airplane on the ground and then you have to drive it across the parking lot. I remember losing years of my life getting to the gate, hoping that I wouldn't hit anything.
Yeah.
Because of the sheer terror of taxiing it when the birds were walking. I mean, it was awful.
Yeah, for sure. And airports like Seattle, where they had, in Sacramento, where they had a lot more low visibility in that. I remember taxiing out there. They had to they used lighting on the taxiway. They had certain points where you couldn't cross that line until you were cleared by the tower. So there was segmented taxiing, if you would, to make it safe and all that. Truly a modern wonder to coordinate things like that. Then we got into the carbon fiber. The 787 is as it says, a showcase for this type of construction, basically made out of pencil lead and advanced materials, making it lighter and more efficient. And geez, I don't know what else there. I mean, there are other components on the airplane that are made out of carbon fiber, but it's again another revolution in technology and all that. And then last but not least is the global positioning system, GPS. You all know that. You all got an iPhone, and it's operated from the same satellites that we operate our airplanes with. And it's changed. It's saved money, making us able to have more direct routing. It certainly helps us know more accurately where we are. It's just phenomenal. Anything else, Eric, you could think about?
No, that's a real good synopsis of the everything from when you and I started to where they are now, and really the big changes. We lived through the biggest of the big changes, and one of my buddy's dads. He likes to say his dad would come home after operating those high-powered turboprops, like you showed the DC-6 and the big conveyor.
Oh yeah.
And his wife would say, "What happened?" He'd say, "Well, we lost an engine over here, and then we had some electrical problems with our wild AC generators, and we had some drama over here." And he'd have something to report at every trip. And then when he started flying jet airplanes on the routes regularly, Mama would say, "Well, what happened on your trip?" He'd say, "Nothing." He'd come home and say nothing.
Yeah.
And then my friend said, his dad said, the only weird thing is now we have girl pilots and boy stewardesses. He says that part's weird, which is not politically correct at all, by the way. But he said he said that's what my dad said the biggest change in aviation was that he lived through.
Sure.
Well, here's a comment from Joan. Said, I preferred higher prices, fewer passenger, and better experience before deregulation. Now it's just like taking the bus. And even I can relate to that the service, like on Air Canada flying over to Frankfurt, the it's not even a wooden fork anymore. It's like composite where 90% of that fork is glue, right? And you're like,
they use a lot of bamboo now, I think.
but this was some kind of composite. You can even see the composite layers of that thing. And that's not even, that's just for us as passengers. It's like one of those things. How much less can you give us and still charge,
And they tried to kill your kids coming back, right, Dieter? 9 hours of no food or movie.
Yes,
they lived. They tried to kill them, but
I'm happy to say they survived. But 10 minutes before takeoff, they had already started with boarding. Air Canada announced that on this flight there will be absolutely no in-flight entertainment and no internet for the duration of the flight. And
what kind of equipment were they flying?
And it was a 777.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, no.
And my son just he was like texting us and was like, Air Canada, you're on your own, kids.
Wow. Yeah. Always when you just comparing those old reciprocating engines, the DC-6, DC-7s and whatnot, it would be just totally normal, just going from the West Coast to Hawaii, which is going to take, but 8 hours, Eric, maybe?
Must have at least 300 knots.
It might even longer.
Yeah. I think more like probably close pushing 10-ish.
Yeah. I know from Hickam, from Okinawa, or from Hawaii to Guam is 15 and a half hours in a C-123. And anyway, what I was going to say is that it would be routine to have an engine quit along the way, and not as routine, but to lose 2 of them. So it's just amazing that now we don't do that. Jet engines. Eric said before, I've shared, my whole career, never ever had an engine failure in my airline career. Just amazing. So, and then this is the future coming up. I couldn't find anything on this. Airbus is working on 0E. They're all working on a lower carbon footprint. And so who knows what it'll be like after I'm gone here. And electric propulsion. That's the one I'm waiting for to see when they have electric engines on a modern jetliner. So anyway, so let's just celebrate the fact that we're all living in this era and can take advantage of all these modern conveniences and mainly the safety of that. And despite the fact that we've had a week that's reminded us that we make mistakes or things happen sometimes, it is still the safest way to travel on the planet, without a doubt. There's nothing that even comes close to that. Safer than walking, I like to say. You're more likely to get killed being a pedestrian than you are being in a commercial airliner. So the reason it is so safe is because we're backed by rigorous safety measures and well-trained people, professionals, mechanics, pilots, flight attendants, and technicians dedicated to your well-being. And it's normal for your mind to focus on what if scenarios and try to shift your thoughts to what is instead, because what if does nothing for your composure. What is more relevant. whether it's the skilled pilots, the advanced technology, or the safety procedures, all of that's in place to make sure that your flight is safe. So take it step by step, break your journey into smaller parts, booking, packing, getting the airport, boarding, focusing on the next step. Take a deep breath. Whenever you feel any anxiety, or even before, practice learning how to calm yourself. Use positive affirmations to reframe those dysfunctional thoughts that have crept into your brain over the course of your life, and learn how to distract yourself. Find something else that you can do to steal your hijacked attention back from a brain that wants to keep you on guard and close to the edge. And the last thing, of course, visualize your success. Literally, we're working on some new visualizations for people, custom visualizations, and getting a lot of positive feedback that this is truly one of the best ways that you can get through some of the bumps in the road on your flight, by having something to rely on, either my voice or somebody like that to talk to you and help calm you down. And remember, every time you face your fears, you're building strength and resilience. You don't have to be fearless to fly. You just need to take that first step. You're capable of so much more than you realize. So take a deep breath and know that you have got this. So with that, barring any further questions, we're going to wish you a pleasant end to 2024, and hope you have a fabulous 2025. We hope you spend whatever is appropriate for you in 2025, and we'll be back next week into the new year. Eric, Dieter, and I. Thanks, everybody.
We're going back to Tuesdays.
Yeah, good point.
1 week and 1 day.
That's right. Tuesday, 6:30 Pacific. And also that this will be this next year, 2025, will be our 8th season running of our Fearless Flight weekly live shows. So
oh my gosh, I remember the first time you told me to just grab my iPhone, quit whining, and talk into it, sitting in the kitchen counter trying to get it to sit up on its own. God, and you kept saying, yeah, don't worry about it. Oh my gosh, that's hard to believe. It's been 8 years. But thanks for the encouragement, Dieter, because that made a difference for us. So anyway, all right, everybody, thanks. And if you are going to be anywhere near the Phoenix area this weekend, we have our monthly Clear for Takeoff 101 in-person class. And no matter where you live in the world, if you want to come on and get some free training, it'll be on Sunday morning at 10 p.m. Pacific, or 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, for our Clear for Takeoff 101 online class. Okay, so we do this every month. So hope to see you back there. And whatever you do, keep flying. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a great week. Bye-bye. Happy New Year.